Alright, so it's Friday, so you know what that means. It is time for our weekly power rankings as we get into lucky number 13, into week 13 of the NHL season. It is the last week of the NHL season for 2019, and that means it's the last power rankings for 2019. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe. Now let's take a look at this week's short week power rankings. Alright, so first off, I want to say a very happy holidays to everybody. Took a little bit of a break earlier this week for the holiday season, celebrating and observing those holidays. Now, heading into the new year, it is time for our final power rankings for 2019, week 13. So a lucky week for some teams, but not such a lucky week for some others, and we'll get into that. So starting off as we normally do, taking a look in the Metropolitan Division in the Eastern Conference at number 8 this week, staying at number 8 for the 8th or 9th week in a row, is the New Jersey Devils. So the Devils are 12, 19, and 5 on this season. They did pick up a win this week, but they only won 1 of 3 games this week. They've lost to the Washington Capitals. They've lost to the Columbus Blue Jackets in Columbus. And they beat the Chicago Blackhawks heading into the holiday season, destroying the Chicago Blackhawks in the United Center 7-1. The New Jersey Devils, since trading Taylor Hall, have actually looked pretty solid. They obviously they didn't really show it this past week, only winning 1 game, but you can see the team definitely looks a little bit different. For the better and for the worse. Mackenzie Blackwood has actually been pretty solid for the Devils in net since sending Corey Schneider down to the American Hockey League and inevitably, pretty much getting rid of Schneider at this point. Taylor Hall, now that distraction is out of the way, definitely helps a little bit. PK Subban's numbers really haven't come up. Obviously, there's been talk, since he is now getting engaged to Lindsey Vonn. It seems like he's definitely got some other things going on outside of hockey, and you wonder how much longer the Devils' patience will be there with PK Subban. Obviously, there are plenty of other guys that the Devils could be looking to trade at the trade deadline. There's definitely a possibility of that for the Devils. Taking a look at number 7 this week, staying at number 7, another New York Metro team is the New York Rangers. So the Rangers are 17, 15, and 4 on the season, and they won 1 of their 3 games this week, beating the Anaheim Ducks at home. A pretty beat-up Anaheim Ducks, to say the least. A Sunday matinee game. The Ducks were down with the flu bug last weekend, so the New York Rangers didn't show much mercy beating up on the Anaheim Ducks there. A pretty, back and forth game early, and then the Rangers kind of took over toward the end of the first period, and there was a little bit of some fighting action going on. Delorier getting a fight with Haley in the third. It was a pretty solid game, but the Rangers definitely struggling a little bit here coming into the new year. And maybe some questions in personnel on the ice and possibly behind the bench as well. You wonder how much patience the new Rangers management has up top. How much longer is this going to last for the Rangers? Looking at number 6 in this week's power rankings in the Metro is the Columbus Blue Jackets. So the Blue Jackets are 17, 14, and 6 on the season. They won both their games this week, beating the New Jersey Devils 5-1 and the New York Islanders 3-2 on Long Island to finish their schedule before the break. There was a tight game. It was 2-2 late in that game, and the Blue Jackets were able to get away with it in the final 5 minutes. I was watching that game, and I knew the Islanders didn't look great. The Blue Jackets, the Islanders seemed to have control, but you didn't feel it. And the Blue Jackets took full advantage, got a little bit of an opening. The Islanders were a little bit lazy in their defensive zone, wide open in front, a great pass in front, and the Blue Jackets put the game away, winning that one 3-2. Taking a look at number 5 in the Metro, staying at number 5 is the Pittsburgh Penguins. So the Penguins are 20, 11, and 4 on the season. They split their games this week, winning 1 and losing 1. They continue their Western Canadian road trip, playing the Edmonton Oilers in Edmonton, winning that one 5-2 in Edmonton. And then they would finish off the road trip, finishing off this week with a 4-1 loss in Vancouver. So definitely not the best thing there for the Penguins, but the good news is Matt Murray isn't playing well, but Tristan Jarry is leading the league right now He's toward the top of both save percentage and goals against average in the league. He's giving up less than 2 goals a game on average through his season right now with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Unbelievable. His save percentage is in the top 3 as well. The Pittsburgh Penguins really might have a gem here in Tristan Jarry. And to think, earlier on in the year, they were looking to trade Tristan Jarry. Kind of interesting, to say the least. Taking a look at number 4, actually sliding down a little bit in this week's power rankings, is the Carolina Hurricanes. So the Carolina Hurricanes are 22-13-2 on the season. They lost both their games this week, which definitely doesn't help their cause. They started the week at home losing 4-2 to the Florida Panthers, and then they lost a crazy game against the Toronto Maple Leafs in Toronto, losing 8-6. Enough said. I think Carolina Hurricane fans want me to move on. So take a look at number 3, moving down a spot. The Islanders were at the top not too long ago. They find themselves 3rd in this week's power rankings in the Metro. The Islanders are 23-9-3 on the season, and they really didn't have a great week. They did not win this week. They were able to pick up a point in the game, a matinee game last Saturday against the Anaheim Ducks, where they lost 6-5 to the Anaheim Ducks. And then they lose to the Columbus Blue Jackets at home as well on Monday. So really a disappointing week for the New York Islanders. The last couple of weeks, the Islanders have definitely started to stall out a little bit. They just seem to be lacking that motivation they had earlier in the season when they were on that huge point streak. They felt like they had something to play for to keep that point streak alive. And kind of up until that point, sometimes teams have that where they're really pushing, and then they kind of fall into, the dog days of the season and kind of lose focus. I feel like the Islanders are a little bit in that spot right now. So hopefully they're able to recapture that heading into 2020. Barry Trotz is the guy. I'm very confident that he will get the Islanders back on track. They will inevitably make the playoffs. I'm not too worried about that. But Barry Trotz definitely has to figure that out with the Islanders right now. And the Islanders' lack of scoring doesn't really show. They gave up 6 to the Anaheim Ducks in a shootout, but they were able to score 5, and they scored 2 against the Blue Jackets. But you could tell on power plays and in critical situations, the Islanders have struggled to score goals, and that's where you need that guy that the Islanders desperately need, a guy that can just score at ease, at will. And they really lack that. And in some of these games, specifically this past week, it really showed for the Islanders and really hurt them now in the power rankings as well. So that means moving up to the highest spot they have been in goal line hockey history power rankings at number 2 this week is the Broad Street Bullies, the Philadelphia Flyers. So the Flyers are 21-11-5 on the season, and they won both their games this week to help that cause out as well. They play the Ottawa Senators in Ottawa, a 5-4 shootout win in that one. Then they beat the New York Rangers 5-1 at home, a divisional rival in the Rangers heading into the break. Not too bad for the Philadelphia Flyers. The Flyers are playing really well. Carter Hart has really been unbelievable for the Philadelphia Flyers, and we knew the Flyers were good. They've been contenders for a while now, but they've had some goaltending controversies over the years. Obviously, they traded Sergei Bobrovsky a long time ago. They brought in Michael Neuwirth, and things really didn't work out, and the Flyers really had some issues with goaltending. They had a window, and they've continued to have a window, but now that they have Carter Hart, who is a really solid goaltender, they could put him in almost any night, and they find ways to win, and he could steal some wins, and the Philadelphia Flyers are finding that success finally with Carter Hart. The Flyers are reaping the rewards of that, especially some help behind the bench. Alain Vigneault, an unbelievable coach. We've seen him bring some really solid teams deep into the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Vancouver Canucks, most recently the New York Rangers. He has a pretty good track record, and the Philadelphia Flyers seem to be destined for that path in the next couple of years. So that means staying at number 1 in the Metro this week is the team in Washington, as the Washington Capitals are at number 1 once again, 27-7-5 on the season. They won 2 of their 3 games this week. They beat the New Jersey Devils 6-3 in New Jersey, a pretty crazy game there in the Prudential Center. They would play the Tampa Bay Lightning at home, a 3-1 victory over the Tampa Bay Lightning. Unfortunately, they end the week up in Boston with a 7-3 loss in Boston, but nonetheless a very solid team in the Bruins. And the Bruins have struggled a little bit recently. I think the Bruins were really looking for the Capitals in that one, and they made sure to wake up for that. So unfortunately for the Caps, they kind of ran into the wrong team at the wrong time heading into the holiday break. But the Capitals have pretty much dominated the Metropolitan Division. Besides the first couple of weeks, it looked like we had a team, and the Islanders for a little bit. The Capitals pretty much have dominated the Metropolitan Division through the first part of the 2019-2020 season. So with that, let's take a look at the other Eastern Conference division, the Atlantic Division. All right, so moving along, taking a look at the Atlantic Division. A little bit of a shakeup here in the Atlantic. Starting things off, though, is pretty much the same as it's been. At number 8, number 31 on most people's power rankings, is the Detroit Red Wings. So the Red Wings are 9-26-3 on the season. They did not win either of their games this week. They lost to the Toronto Maple Leafs 4-1 in Toronto, and they lose to the Arizona Coyotes 5-2 at home. Both those games really disappointing for the Detroit Red Wings. You could really tell the announcers are really getting frustrated with the Red Wings, and rightfully so. The Red Wings really have struggled. I've made videos about this if you want to check them out as well. But the Red Wings really struggling right now. Steve Yzerman has got his work cut out for him. Really, goaltending has been a real issue for this team. It's really unfortunate. Jimmy Howard, since his injury, really, he played his first game. He's been playing with Grand Rapids in the American Hockey League in his recovery. Came up to Detroit in that Arizona game, completely flopped, put the puck in his own net on one of the goals. Just a really disappointing situation for the Red Wings. They're playing all this Christmas organ music throughout the game, all this happy music. I don't think the Red Wing fans were feeling too much in the spirit during this one. Red Wings are really struggling, and it continued to show through this week. A divisional rival in Toronto, they really didn't put much of a performance in that one. Really disappointing for the Red Wings. So at number 7 is the Ottawa Senators. So the Ottawa Senators slipped back down a little bit in this week's power rankings. The Senators are 16-18-4 on the season, and they did pick up 3 out of a possible 4 points this week. They lost to the really hot Philadelphia Flyers 5-4 in a shootout, so they pick up a point in that one. And then they beat the Buffalo Sabres, who have been pretty good themselves, 3-1 there. So the Ottawa Senators really have been a fun team to watch through the first part of this season. Thomas Chabot leading the league in minutes per game on average, so he is really a workhorse. DJ Smith really putting him and Eric Branstrom out for a lot of the hockey games for the Ottawa Senators. I believe Chabot actually last week played over 30 minutes in a game on even strength minutes. So Thomas Chabot really becoming a integral part of this Ottawa Senators team and really starting to take the void of we're not talking about him. So taking a look at number 6, moving up a spot, is the Florida Panthers. So the Panthers are 18-13-5 on the season. They won 2 of their 3 games this week. They beat the Dallas Stars 7-4. They head on a little road trip to take on the Carolina Hurricanes, a 4-2 victory in Carolina. And then they play the Tampa Bay Lightning, their in-state rival, heading into the holiday break. And not too great of a feeling. They lose 6-1 to the Tampa Bay Lightning in that game. The Florida Panthers have definitely had their ups and downs through the first part of this season. Sergei Bobrovsky looks really solid some nights, and then he looks awful on other nights. This team really is led by that group up front. Jonathan Huberdeau and Sasha Barkov have been unbelievable for the Florida Panthers. Really, really solid players. Huberdeau kind of becoming an underrated player at this point. We know about Barkov. We always talk about him being so underrated. He's really not underrated at this point. I think he's well respected through the league. But Jonathan Huberdeau is really secretly, quietly behind Barkov, really putting up some really good numbers for the Panthers. All right, so that means that number 5 in this week's power rankings in the Atlantic is the Buffalo Sabres. So the Sabres are 17-13-8 on the season. They split their games this week, winning one and losing the other. They play the Los Angeles Kings, who've been struggling through the first part of this season as they continue their rebuild. The Buffalo Sabres take advantage, winning 3-2 in that one. Fortunately, they head up to Ottawa to play a divisional opponent in Ottawa, and they lose 3-1 in Ottawa. The Buffalo Sabres, again, there's a team that earlier in the season was really led by one of their, called their favorites through the first couple weeks of the season. The first month was Victor Olofsson, kind of quieted down a little bit. Jack Eichel was on that crazy point streak. Jeff Skinner has gone at least 10 games, I would think, without a goal. Jeff Skinner has really struggled and been really quiet. The Buffalo Sabres really need him to pick it up. The goaltending has been okay on most nights for the Buffalo Sabres, but this team really is right in the middle of the pack, and making the playoffs really is looking more and more like a challenge as the season goes along for the Sabres team. They got to put it together. They have a really solid defensive core. Dahlin, Ristolainen, Bogosian, Olofsson. You have the guys. You need to put this together if you're the Buffalo Sabres and find a way to make the Stanley Cup playoffs. All right, so that means taking a look at number 4 in this week's Power Rankings. Moving up is the Montreal Canadiens. So the Canadiens are 18, 13, and 6 on the season. They split their games this week, winning one and losing the other. They head up to Edmonton to play the Edmonton Oilers. They lose 4-3 in Edmonton. And then they play the Winnipeg Jets, where they find a way to get a victory in Manitoba, a 6-2 victory for the Montreal Canadiens heading into the holiday break. Montreal Canadiens have definitely had their fair share of ups and downs, just like the Buffalo Sabres, who we just talked about. The goaltending has been really interesting for the Canadiens. We've seen Caden Primo come up recently. We've seen them definitely change things up. Charlie Lindgren as well, was actually disappointed. Primo got the call up before him, but he inevitably got a shot as well. So this team definitely, with Keith Kincaid kind of trying to rehab his game right now in the American Hockey League, the Canadiens are testing some of their younger goaltenders to see how they are going to, dip their toes in the water a little bit in the top league in the world, and trying to get them going in Primo and Lindgren. While Carey Price has struggled a little bit, it's given some of those younger goaltenders more of an opportunity to get more ice time and more games for the Canadiens. The Canadiens definitely are playing fairly well right now. They're definitely struggling in some other areas. They definitely have some issues on the back end. They could definitely use another defenseman. Sherratt is playing an awful lot of minutes for the Montreal Canadiens. They have the guys up front, obviously a little bit of inconsistency, but the Canadiens have a really solid group up front. They really, just need to put it together up front, but the defense definitely could use some help, and Sergachev would look really good right now for the Montreal Canadiens. All right, so taking a look at number 3, actually moving down a spot in this week's Power Rankings in the Atlantic, is the Tampa Bay Lightning. So the Tampa Bay Lightning are 18, 13, and 4 on the season. They split 2 of their games this week. They played the Washington Capitals, where they would lose 3-1 in Washington, and then they would play the Florida Panthers to end it off. Heading into the holiday break, a 6-1 victory over their in-state rivals, the Florida Panthers. So the Tampa Bay Lightning, definitely, there's definitely some concern about the Tampa Bay Lightning. They're only 1 game above 500 overall. They find themselves teetering on a playoff, being in the playoffs one day, out another day right now. They're really a fringe team right now, and with how stacked that Metro division is right now, seems like the top 5 in the Metro will be taking those playoff spots. Definitely doesn't look good for anybody in 4 or 5 right now in the Atlantic. It's definitely a little bit shaky, a little bit uneasy of a feeling, and the Tampa Bay Lightning are right in that spot. There's been talk about John Cooper possibly being a little bit on the hot seat right now. We benched Kucherov a couple of games ago, so the Tampa Bay Lightning definitely are a team to keep an eye on heading into 2020. They have to turn things around. And is that, belief from last year a little bit dying right now? Is the message from Cooper getting a little stale? We'll have to wait and see. But right now, the Tampa Bay Lightning, a little bit concerning, and they slip in this week's Power Rankings. All right, so take a look at number 2 in this week's Power Rankings. Moving up a spot thanks to the Tampa Bay Lightning is the Toronto Maple Leafs. So the Maple Leafs are 20, 14, and 4 on the season. They go undefeated this week, winning all 3 of their games. They beat the New York Rangers 6-3 in MSG to start the week off. They would play the Detroit Red Wings, a divisional rival, taking advantage of a struggling Red Wings team. They beat the Pinwheels 4-1 in that one. Then they played the Carolina Hurricanes in an absolutely crazy game. If that was anybody's Christmas gift, getting tickets to that Leafs-Canes game, that was worth every penny. The Hurricanes scored a couple of goals in the first period, and it kind of looked like they were taking over. All the Leafs defense is not playing well. They suck tonight. And then all of a sudden, the Toronto Maple Leafs score 3 goals in 59 seconds, and they take the lead. Mitch Marner scoring 2 of those goals, and the Maple Leafs win that game 8-6. A crazy hockey game heading into the holiday break, and Toronto Maple Leaf fans have been clamoring for a high-scoring, high-potent offensive team like the Leafs. Finding a way to get a victory like that at home may not win you the Stanley Cup playoffs, but during the regular season, it definitely makes it more fun for the fans, and the Leafs were able to do that heading into the holiday break. So, with that, that means staying at the top once again in the Atlantic Division, kind of taking over, kind of the same thing as the Capitals dominating their division once again, is the Boston Bruins. So the Bruins, after making the Stanley Cup Finals last year, maybe you would expect a hangover in the first part of the regular season this year. Not the case. Bruce Cassidy has done a great job motivating these guys, and they have themselves a 22-7-9 record heading into the holiday break. They played the Nashville Predators at home. They were able to pick up a point in that one. They lost 4-3 to the Nashville Predators, and then they would beat the Washington Capitals 7-3 at TD Garden to head into the break. So the Boston Bruins, the goaltending has been good throughout most of the season. They picked up a bunch of goals on this little homestand here this week, scoring 10 goals in those 2 games. So pretty exciting hockey for the fans there up in Boston, watching the Bruins play really well. They definitely struggled a little bit over the last month, but they found a way this week to really solidify themselves heading into the holiday season, and hopefully a good start heading into 2020. So that's it. So a quick recap. At number 8 is the Detroit Red Wings. Number 7, the Ottawa Senators. At number 6 is the Florida Panthers. Number 5 is the Buffalo Sabres. At number 4, the Montreal Canadiens. Number 3, the Tampa Bay Lightning. At number 2, the Toronto Maple Leafs. And at number 1 is the Boston Bruins. All right, so now we're heading to the West Coast as we take a look at the Pacific Division. So starting things off at number 8, staying at number 8 this week, is the Anaheim Ducks. So the Ducks are 15-18-4 on the season. They split their 2 games in the New York metro area this week. A 6-5 shootout win on Long Island, beating the New York Islanders. That was a crazy game. I went to that game. Really just a crazy game. Really the momentum shifter in that game was when there were actually 2. The Anaheim Ducks scored a short-handed goal when Cam Fowler was in the box. And then they would come down. Cam Fowler would actually score a goal. The Islanders would review that goal. Ended up being, the call would stand. The Islanders lost the challenge. They would have to put a guy in the box. And that was kind of it. The Islanders really were never able to gain that momentum back. They did score a goal toward the end of the final minutes of that third period to tie it. But really, it seemed like it was a pretty back-and-forth game. The overtime was, left something to be desired, but a pretty good overtime overall. And then things would end up being decided in the shootout. Actually, where I was sitting in the Coliseum, there was actually a leak. There was leaking pipes in the Coliseum. So pretty inevitable, kind of a sign of things to come. The Islanders would end up losing that game 6-5, and the building was coming in after 10 goals in that game. There, the Coliseum it's getting old. They can't handle that many goals in that arena. And then they would lose to the New York Rangers. The flu bug really hit the Anaheim Ducks. Getzlaf missed that first game against the Islanders, and then the next day, Silfverberg was out. A couple of other guys as well. So the team really was kind of bringing up a bunch of guys from San Diego and trying to get them over in time for the early game in New York. It didn't really matter because the Rangers pretty much dominated that game 5-1. So take a look at number 7 is the San Jose Sharks. So the San Jose Sharks are 16-20-2 on the season. They did not win a game this week, but they played some pretty solid opponents. They lost to the St. Louis Blues 5-2 at home and the Vegas Golden Knights 3-1 on the road. The Sharks have definitely had their fair share of struggles. Martin Jones has looked a little bit better over the past couple of weeks. Doesn't really show this week, though. Gave up 8 goals in 2 games, so the Sharks definitely struggling a little bit. They did score 3 goals, which just isn't enough, but nonetheless, the San Jose Sharks kind of continuing along. The coaching change really doesn't seem to be making all that big of a difference right now. Really cleaning out all that personnel there in San Jose. Really not seeing the results quite yet. So taking a look at number 6 in this week's Power Rankings in the Pacific is the Los Angeles Kings. So the Kings are 15, 20, and 4 on the season. They slipped down a couple of spots in this week's Power Rankings. They lost to the Buffalo Sabres in Buffalo 3-2, and then they would play the St. Louis Blues and lose that one 4-1 at home. So the Los Angeles Kings definitely took a step back this week. A couple of teams moved up a little bit, played some pretty solid hockey in the Pacific. So unfortunately, the Los Angeles Kings fell victim and unfortunately moved down in this week's Power Rankings. All right, so moving up, that means in this week's Power Rankings at number 5 is the Calgary Flames. So the Flames are 19, 15, and 5 on the season. They split their 2 games this week. They played the Dallas Stars, won that one 5-1 in Dallas. Pretty much a sleeper through most of that game. The Calgary Flames dominated for a large portion of that one. And then they lose 3-0 in Minnesota heading into the holiday break. Calgary Flames are a little bit hard to read right now. They played really solid in Dallas, who seems to be struggling a little bit. But at home, the Dallas Stars have been very good, so that's a solid win there for the Calgary Flames. But then they go and play the Minnesota Wild, who really are kind of at the bottom of the pack. And they find themselves getting shut out up in Minnesota, so a disappointing effort there for the Calgary Flames. But nonetheless, since the coaching change, they find themselves only 1 game below 500. They definitely haven't had the turnaround that the Leafs have had, but they really aren't that far off. And considering where that Pacific Division is, they definitely have room for an improvement and to move up very quickly toward the top of that division. So that means at number 4 in the Pacific this week is the Vancouver Canucks. So the Canucks are 19, 15, and 4. They won both their games this week. At home, they played the Pittsburgh Penguins, 4-1 victory against the not the Baby Pens, they look like it. A 4-1 victory over the Penguins, and then a 4-2 victory over their Alberta rivals, the Edmonton Oilers. So the Vancouver Canucks have had some issues. Travis Green possibly being on his way out. There's been talk about that. Definitely Jim Benning being a little bit on the hot seat if this team doesn't make the playoffs. They're finding ways to play pretty solid, and this is not the level that I think Canucks fans were hoping for. They saw Pettersson, Besser, Horvat being the captain, bringing in guys like Tyler Myers, hoping that Markstrom would play really well. Which, Jacob Markstrom, he might be in Vezina conversations at the end of the season if he keeps this up. He's playing very well for the Vancouver Canucks. There's definitely some stiff competition there, but he definitely has to be a candidate at this point in the season. A very solid goaltender there for the Vancouver Canucks. He's been playing very well. And the Canucks are in a weird spot because they have some pending unrestricted free agents, so they have to be careful. Jim Benning definitely has some decisions to make over the next couple of weeks. Chris Tanev is an unrestricted free agent, so they need to kind of figure out what they're going to do this season. They got to make sure they make the playoffs, but if they don't make the playoffs, what do you do if you're Jim Benning here? So definitely some tough decisions for the Vancouver Canucks heading into the trade deadline at the end of February. And that's going to be all the talk from here on out pretty much, until the end of February. So Vancouver Canucks will definitely be in that conversation. But right now they find themselves in a spot where they've given themselves an opportunity to make the playoffs. They're doing pretty well so far in the dog days of the regular season. And heading into 2020, we'll see if they can get on a little bit of a hot streak at the right place at the right time. The Vancouver Canucks could be a pretty solid team heading into the playoffs. All right, so at number 3 in this week's Power Rankings in the Pacific, they've continued to move down. They actually stay put this week, is the Edmonton Oilers. So the Oilers right now are 20, 16, and 4 on the season. They won 1 of their 3 games this week. They lost 5-2 as the Penguins have been kind of going through the Western Canadian portion of their road schedule. A 5-2 loss for the Oilers, a 4-3 win at home for the Oilers, and unfortunately a loss over the crosstown rivals over in BC, the Vancouver Canucks, a 4-2 loss in that one. So the Edmonton Oilers have definitely had their fair share of issues recently. They've looked pretty solid in some games, and then other games they look a little bit off. And the Vancouver Canucks are a pretty solid opponent, a good, a good mark for the the Edmonton Oilers and where they stand. The real issue for this team really has been, anything besides James Neal, who he even has dried up a little bit. Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, they're 1 and 2 in the league in points, and everybody else is kind of nowhere. The Edmonton Oilers really need to find some depth scoring, and they really need it fast. Another good sign. Oscar Klefbom is toward the top of the league in minutes. He's played very well for the Oilers, but they need some more help on the defensive side, as well as some scoring depth on the offensive side. And again, I'm not comparing them to the Colorado Avalanche, but if they could find a way to do what the Avalanche did with the Matt Duchene situation, I wonder if a guy like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins could kind of be a guy, if they hype him up, they get him maybe to play with Draisaitl and McDavid, really put his points up. I know they like Cassian on that line, but if there's a way you could beef up maybe that second line or play him on the power play, somewhere, and really get Nuge's minutes up, maybe they could have a situation where, kind of the Matt Duchene situation where, maybe you can move Nuge for a pretty solid haul in return. Maybe you catch a team off guard a little bit, and you kind of do what they did, maybe not to the level that Colorado did, Joe Sakic, but if you could find a way to make a deal work, because we saw that, it's kind of the same scenario in Colorado. Obviously, things have turned out a little differently for the Avalanche, but you've got your core center, Nathan McKinnon. Obviously, Connor McDavid is at pretty much they're pretty close overall in level, but we all know McDavid is the better player. But then you have Draisaitl, who's kind of the Rantanen or Landeskog, and then everything kind of falls off from there. But Matt Duchene was that not secondary piece, but behind McKinnon. And I think a guy like Nugent-Hopkins can maybe bring a haul. And if Ken Holland is really that general manager wizard that he was back in Detroit, and he's hoping to do that here, he needs to find a way to do that here. And this is a good situation. Maybe he could hype him up, maybe get some more minutes and points for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and they could get a good return there. All right, so taking a look at number 2 is the Vegas Golden Knights. The Golden Knights are 20-15-5 on the season. They split their 2 games this week, beating the San Jose Sharks, one of their divisional rivals, 3-1, and then they lose to the Colorado Avalanche 7-3 heading into the holiday break. So the Vegas Golden Knights have definitely been a weird team. All the success they've had through the first 2 seasons, it seemed a little bit too easy for the Vegas Golden Knights, and this year they're definitely experiencing a little bit of adversity. There's definitely a new team on the block, and the Arizona Coyotes kind of taking the top spot right now in the Pacific. The Edmonton Oilers are kind of hanging around. The Vancouver Canucks, Calgary, they all seem to be right in the mix there. So the Vegas Golden Knights definitely have a little more competition now in that Pacific Division, and it seems to be evening out a little bit. The Golden Knights definitely have some competition, but right now they find themselves in a pretty good spot, in a playoff spot right now. They need to find a way to stay in there till the end of the season because they need to make the playoffs. If they make the playoffs, we've seen what Marc-Andre Fleury can do in the past. He may be able to get this team into a pretty deep playoff run. So as long as they make the playoffs, I don't see why the Vegas Golden Knights would have any issues. They just need to get into those playoffs. So that means staying at number 1 once again in the Pacific Division is the Arizona Coyotes. So the Coyotes are 21-14-4 on the season. They split their 2 games this week. They played the Detroit Red Wings, and Detroit got a 5-2 victory, kind of shutting out the crowd there in Little Caesars, a 5-2 victory there. Then they will play the Nashville Predators back on their way home to Arizona in Nashville. They would lose that one 3-2 in Nashville. The Arizona Coyotes, definitely a little bit of some concern with the goaltending now, with the injuries that they've been having, so hopefully everything goes well there. But this team, since bringing in Taylor Hall, has looked fairly solid. They've definitely, coming into bringing Taylor Hall in, there were a couple games where they just couldn't find a way to win. That New Jersey game as a prime example, when New Jersey came into town a couple of weeks ago. They just couldn't find a way to get that victory. They need to find a way to get things done. And there's a team that really, the expectations are high now for the Arizona Coyotes. They're trying to build some hype around this team, get some fans in attendance. You got to find a way to maintain a spot in the playoffs. This is huge for the Arizona Coyotes. John Shakeup really needs to get this team into the playoffs this year. All right, so that means taking a look at a recap at number 8 is the Anaheim Ducks. Number 7, the San Jose Sharks. Number 6, the Los Angeles Kings. Number 5, the Calgary Flames. Number 4, the Vancouver Canucks. Number 3 is the Edmonton Oilers. At number 2, the Vegas Golden Knights. And staying at number 1 in the Pacific is the Arizona Coyotes. So let's take a trip down the road to the Central Division. All right, so we have a little bit of a shakeup here. The most shakeup this week in the Power Rankings is in the Central Division. So starting things off, not too much of a change. I don't think anyone will be surprised. At number 7, once again, the mighty have fallen, the Chicago Blackhawks. So the Blackhawks are 15, 17, and 6 on the season. They split their 2 games this week. They finally beat the Colorado Avalanche in their own building, beat the Colorado Avalanche 5-3 in that game. Unfortunately, coming home into the holiday break, they might have been a little bit too excited heading into that game. They lost 7-1 to the New Jersey Devils in the United Center. Really a disappointing effort there by the Chicago Blackhawks. There's definitely going to be some issues for this team now that Calvin DeHaan and Brent Seabrook are out for the season with upper body injuries. We're going to definitely be seeing some different players in Chicago. Dylan Gilberts or something like that was recently recalled earlier this month, so he's going to be playing more. Ole Mata will be playing more. So the Chicago Blackhawks definitely have some deficiencies to begin with on the back end, and now even more so with Seabrook and DeHaan out. This Blackhawks team really looks like a beat horse. DeBrincat's playing on the third line now with Doc. There's definitely some issues with the Blackhawks. Hopefully they're able to fix it. Again, you've got some promising guys. You got Nylander in the top 6. So there's definitely some hope for this team, but really disappointing start to this season so far for the Blackhawks. All right, so at number 6 is the Minnesota Wild. We're not seeing much change here either. 18, 15, and 5 on the season. They split their 2 games this week as well. Seems to be a theme here. They played the Winnipeg Jets, lost that one at home 6-0. A pretty boring snooze fest in that one for the Minnesota fans. Then they would play the Calgary Flames, where they would pick up a 3-0 shutout over the Flames heading into the holiday season. The Minnesota Wild definitely had their fair shares. They've had some success over the past couple of weeks. Seems to be coming back down to earth over the last 2 weeks. But the Minnesota Wild putting up some pretty good numbers. They're only 2 games below 500. Coming into the season, I think they would have been last in this division, if I'm going to be completely honest. And Bruce Boudreau, he's taken a lot of flack over the years for some of the teams he's been with, but he's doing a pretty good job right now with the Minnesota Wild. And since Kaapo Kähkönen has come up, his team has been able to play pretty solid under Kähkönen. All right, so at number 5 in the Central, heading into the Winter Classic Showdown, we have some pretty good numbers here in the Central. At number 5 is the Dallas Stars. So the Dallas Stars find themselves at a 500 record, 19, 15, and 4 on the season. They lost both their games, unfortunately, this week. They lost to the Florida Panthers down in Sunrise, Florida, 7-4. And then they would play the Calgary Flames at home, which we talked about earlier in the rankings, where they lost 5-1. A pretty boring game, unfortunately. Calgary Flames really dominated most of that game, but Denis Gurianov, this kid is playing so well for the Dallas Stars. He has that move where he comes up on the right side, shields off the defenseman, able to outskate them, and then comes across. Unbelievable goal for the Dallas Stars in that one. Unfortunately, they didn't get the win. I'm sure fans don't want to hear too much about that goal, but Gurianov has done that same move a couple of times now, just winning that one-on-one with the defenseman, and he did it again there, really. Denis Gurianov has really had a great season so far for the Stars. Hopefully that continues, because the Stars have definitely had some issues over the past couple of years, definitely taken a lot of criticism for the lack of winger depth. Obviously, you have Radulov, and you have your big guys, Jamie Benn, who's now playing in the bottom 6 right now for the Dallas Stars. Tyler Seguin as well. But you definitely you've seen some guys come and go, Val Natushkin, Blake Como now back in the bottom six. But this team is a pretty solid team for the Dallas Stars. The goaltending's been solid through and through. They've had some injuries on the back end here and there, but they played really well, and they find themselves, they're fifth in the division. Yeah, but that could easily move in the right direction, and maybe a win on January 1st would help with that. And we're setting ourselves up for a pretty even matchup because at number 4 in the Central Division this week is the Nashville Predators. So the Predators are 18-12-6, a perfect 500 record as well. A little bit of a different tale, though, because they won both their games this week, unlike the Dallas Stars, who lost both their games this week. They beat the Boston Bruins 4-3 in overtime, a pretty solid win up in Boston for the Nashville Predators. And then they would play the Arizona Coyotes, where they would win against a Coyotes team that just picked up Taylor Hall. They would beat them 3-2 at home. So the Nashville Predators and the Dallas Stars setting themselves up for a pretty exciting game down in the Cotton Bowl on January 1st. So make sure to check out our review on the uniforms for that game down below. I'll be putting a link to that, and at the end of the video as well, I'll put a little screen tag for that as well. So taking a look at number 3 in the Central this week, definitely been some controversy over the last couple of weeks. Fans not being certainly happy, but because there's a pretty good argument for these top 3 teams where they can be seeded between the St. Louis Blues, Colorado, and Winnipeg. There's definitely an argument between these teams. They kind of seem to be moving in a carousel, week to week at this point. But at this week, moving down actually, number 3 is the Winnipeg Jets. So the Jets are 21-14-2 on the season, and they split their 2 games this week as well. They went up to Minnesota, winning that one 6-0 in Minnesota, quieting the crowd in there. A perfect road game there for Paul Maurice's Winnipeg Jets. Hellbuck getting the shutout. A 6-2 victory over the Montreal Canadiens, or a 6-2 loss at home against the Montreal Canadiens. So a disappointing effort there to end the week. So again, it's a situation where you can't get a good feel for the Winnipeg Jets this week. They beat a team 6-0, and then they lose 6-2 at home against the Montreal Canadiens, who have had their fair share of ups and downs through this season. So definitely a weird situation here for the Winnipeg Jets. It's definitely good to see that Hellbuck has been really solid. Maybe not toward the end of the week, but he's been really solid for the Winnipeg Jets through the first part of this season. Definitely in the Vezina conversation. Patrik Laine really not putting up the goals right now. He is putting up goals, but not at the level that he did back in his rookie season. But he is finding ways, kind of like we saw with Alex Ovechkin. His play away from the puck has gotten a lot better. He's really become a more he's not a one-dimensional player like he used to be. If he wasn't scoring goals, he was pretty much invaluable. He's really added value to his game, and having that short-term contract with the Winnipeg Jets maybe lit a fire under him. Maybe he's not as valuable as he thought he was, and maybe brought him down to earth a little bit. And this may be a good thing for him and the Winnipeg Jets alike. And he's playing really well. He's finding ways to play in his own end a little bit, playing better. In between the blue lines, toward the middle of the ice, limiting his turnovers. He's playing really well for the Winnipeg Jets, and the Winnipeg Jets really need the most out of Patrik Laine if this team is going to be back in the playoffs. Really an exciting team after all the players they lost earlier this year in 2019. The Winnipeg Jets really, they took a large chunk of that defense away, and they continue to find ways, and Kevin Cheveldayoff has done a very good job with this team. All right, so at number 2 this week in the Central Division, they're first in the standings, but in the Power Rankings, they find themselves at number 2 this week, is the St. Louis Blues. So the Blues are 24-8-6 on the season. They won both their games this week as well, which definitely helped make this decision a little bit more difficult for number 1. They beat the San Jose Sharks 5-2 in San Jose, and the Los Angeles Kings, continuing that California road trip, a 4-1 victory in Tinseltown there. St. Louis Blues, the only reason I did not move them up to number 1 this week is I really like what the Colorado Avalanche have done consistently through the season. They really have not, maybe besides 1 or 2 weeks, they really haven't had any real dry spells. The St. Louis Blues have had their fair share a little bit more of inconsistency. They've been really solid, but definitely, I don't know, I really like what the Avalanche have been able to do. But the St. Louis Blues, give them a ton of credit. You look at what really, and this might be a hot take, but Bill Masterton Trophy right now, I'm giving it to Jake Allen. Top three in both goals for and goals against and save percentage. Jake Allen leads the league at number in the top three right now. In both those categories, Jake Allen really has had a unbelievable turnaround season, and that is huge for the St. Louis Blues. Jordan Binnington's come down to earth a little bit. That was to be expected, but Jake Allen has really come to life and been a huge reason why the St. Louis Blues kind of found their footing toward the top of the Central Division. So that means staying at number one in this week's Power Rankings in the Central to end the new year, or to end 2019. At number one is the Colorado Avalanche. So the Avalanche are 23, 10, and 3 on the season. They're 10 games above 500. How do you not put this team here? They won one of their 2 games this week. They've also Chicago Blackhawks 5-3. Pretty disappointing effort at home there for the Colorado Avalanche. But then they would head to a very hostile environment right before the holidays. It was probably pretty packed there in Vegas. They beat the Vegas Golden Knights 7-3. Putting up a lot of goals in that one heading into the holiday break. Philip Grubauer has been out with injuries and not playing so well, but Francouz has taken that role and really played really well for the Colorado Avalanche this season. Everybody has this team as a contender heading into into 2020 as being the team coming out of the Western Conference, possibly in the Stanley Cup Final. Definitely a little bit of a ways away right now at that, looking that far ahead, but the Colorado Avalanche, it's hard to argue against that. Nathan McKinnon, Gabriel Landeskog, and Mikko Rantanen have been one of the best lines in the NHL. We just talked about Francouz really being a great story. Some would argue would be, probably an American Hockey League goaltender. He's come up and he's found a way to make a name for himself and really be a solid goaltender here for the Colorado Avalanche. The defense is really solid, and some of these guys aren't even in their lineup yet, let alone the guys they do have. And Bowen Byram, who is not here. Cale Makar, who is, and he is so good. The way he moves the puck up, his ability to move up into the play, get points, create the offense for the Colorado Avalanche. Really amazing. And then obviously you have some of that depth. Nazem Kadri, you lost to Alex Kerfoot, but you find replacements. Guys like Jonas Donskoy, who came in the offseason. So the Colorado Avalanche have really been solid. They find a way to play really well through the first part of this season. It's hard to argue that they are one of the better teams, if not the best team in the Western Conference right now. So that's it for this week's Power Rankings, as we are 13 weeks into the NHL season. And unfortunately, this is the last Power Rankings video for 2019. But the good news is it lets us turn a new page heading into 2020. And let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think of this week's Power Rankings? Thank you for watching this video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up and a subscribe. And Happy New Year.